I want to welcome our third panel, Representative David Joyce and Stephanie Weiss, and Ranking Member Rosa DeLore from the Committee on Appropriations. Representative Joyce, welcome back to the Rules Committee, and I'd welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Cole, Ranking Member McGovern, and the members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify on the Continuing Appropriations and Border Security Enhancement Act of 2024. One of the most important powers the Constitution gives Congress is to provide funding for government operations. Unless we act, in 12 short days, the government will shut down, with the exception of certain activities that sustain the lives and the safety of the American people. This bill keeps the government open for an additional 31 days, so the Appropriations Committee in both the House and Senate can continue to bring individual bills to the floor before final negotiations to resolve the differences and enact a fiscal year 2024 appropriations bill. As a nation, we are $32.9 trillion in debt, and our deficit this year is $1.9 trillion. Congress continues to spend more money that we do not have, so we borrow more and more. This course is not sustainable. This bill will come due, and it will not be pleasant. To restrain spending growth, this measure includes an 8% across-the-board reduction to align the Fiscal Responsibility Act spending cap. However, that reduction does not apply to defense, veterans, and disaster relief. In addition, this bill forces this administration, the Biden administration, to do what it will not do on its own: act to address the border security crisis that has been raging for the last 2.5 years. This bill includes the bulk of H.R. 2, the House-passed Border Security and Immigration Enforcement Bill, and several provisions from my Homeland Security Appropriations Bill that together will put us on a path to securing the border. We have seen more than 2 million migrants come across the border illegally each of the last 2 years, and this year's numbers are on the same trajectory. No one can say with a straight face that we have operational control on the border. For the last month, the encounters have only accelerated, with over 9,000 on average every day. And tens of thousands are passing through Panama on their way north as we speak, so this is only going to get worse before it gets better. It is clear this administration is focused on managing the border and not securing it. Whatever steps the administration claims it is taking, they're not working. The reason is simple: policy matters, and the administration is sending all the wrong signals to the cartels and migrants with its open border policies. When you fail to enforce the nation's immigration laws, more will come. When you abuse parole to let in hundreds of thousands en masse, more will come. When you allow the asylum system to be gamed, more will come. And the reality is that overwhelming majority of the migrants who enter the country through these false pathways have no legal basis to remain in our country. We should stop offering that false hope to so many. This bill provides a solution to keep the government open, secure the border, restrain the growth of government spending while we negotiate the final fiscal year 2024 appropriations bills. Thank you for holding this hearing. I'm ready to answer your questions, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much. We'll go next to my very good friend from Oklahoma. It's wonderful to have you here. I think I note for the record, probably the first time you're testifying on behalf of the Appropriations Committee. So, gentlelady from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you are correct. It is my first time to be here with you before this committee. Let me start by thanking my colleague and friend Dave Joyce for being here this evening. And first and foremost, I want to reiterate that the package before you is focused on securing the southern border. For far too long, this administration's open border policies have decimated communities as fentanyl and crime have flowed across the U.S.-Mexico border. I am pleased that this bill includes nearly the entirety of H.R. 2, plus 9 appropriations limitation provisions to block the Mayorkas DHS from releasing aliens into the interior while they await a hearing, issuing employment authorization documents to certain aliens, and halting the use of the CBP One app. Of course, the legislation also seeks to avert a government shutdown in a fiscally responsible way. The bill is at a funding level that is about 1% lower than the current spend rate and holds funding for DoD and veterans programs harmless. In doing so, the bill does impose an 8% across-the-board cut on the remainder of the non-defense, non-veterans, and non-disasters discretionary funding for the duration of the 1-month continuing resolution. This will provide additional time for us to complete our work on the remaining appropriations bills. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you very much. It's also a great pleasure to recognize and welcome back my very good friend, the distinguished ranking member of the Appropriations Committee. I note for the record that while you were pouring your water, you first poured water for Mr. Joyce.
Right, I was going to provide some for Congresswoman Bice, but I couldn't get her
Which
attention.
just tells you the kind of person my friend is. So as she goes into battle, she still makes sure that you're going to be taken care of on the other side. That I recognize my very good friend, the ranking member of Appropriations Committee, for any remarks she cares to make.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, and thank Ranking Member McGovern. Mr. Chairman, I oppose consideration of this continuing resolution, which perpetrates the majority's inability and unwillingness to govern responsibly. The clock has run out. We are less than 2 weeks away from a government shutdown and have little to show for it. Yet rather than negotiate in good faith on the bipartisan legislation that everyone knows will ultimately be required to keep the United States government operational, House Republicans are attempting to unify their own conference with a disastrous continuing resolution that would cut border security and the Coast Guard, cut biomedical research at the National Institutes of Health, obliterate LIHEAP, abandon distressed farmers and rural communities, cripple the FAA, and that's our air traffic controllers, desert our allies, yield global competitiveness and energy leadership to China, cut funding to fight wildfires, pull thousands of teachers out of our children's classrooms hardly a month into the school year, and cut needed funds for a 988 crisis lifeline. Finally, we get to see an America First bill. But how does this bill put the American people first? This bill cuts America first. Then it cuts Israel. It cuts Ukraine and other allies. It cuts funding for the border. It cuts police, teachers, doctors, and scientists. It cuts children and families, and it cuts farmers. I understand that there was some confusion on the conference call that House Republicans held last night over what, if anything, was cut from the border. I know my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are concerned with the border, but allow me to let you know what is in your bill. It is an 8.1% cut for border security measures. Please let your leadership know if you have any questions, and if they still cannot answer them, I would be happy to. But I implore you to please read the bill. Read the bill. Winter is coming. It gets cold in Connecticut, and even colder, I am sure, in the Dakotas. Yet our colleagues from North and South Dakota have introduced a bill that cuts LIHEAP an astonishing 65% from last year's level. What will happen to those that depend on this program for assistance paying their energy bills? This is unprecedented because this body has never not provided LIHEAP the resources needed in a continuing resolution or otherwise. It has always been a bipartisan priority. Or consider the constituents of our colleagues from Florida. We are still in the heart of hurricane season and have already seen a storm devastate coastal communities this year. Not only would this bill directly inflict cuts to FEMA and the National Weather Service, harming our readiness in the face of escalating catastrophes, it undermines our response capabilities as well. How will Americans dealing with impacts from natural disasters react when they learn how emergency disaster relief funding fares in this bill, when cleanup and recovery efforts in their neighborhood are shut off because the funding ran dry? My good friend, the chairman from Oklahoma, is a champion for Native American programs. Yet activities for Native American children, families, and law enforcement would all be cut. Roads, energy, development, public safety, and education on tribal lands would be upended. And you know, Mr. Chairman, I believe you know, as I do, the hard work and the sincere compromise and collaboration that is required to actually pass appropriations bill. This bill will not become law. Everyone in this body knows that to be true. The bill's time frame does not give enough time to consider all 12 appropriations bills. This would not be the only continuing resolution required to get us to the finish line. This is not a 30-day agreement. It will be a continuing resolution after continuing resolution with the same cuts and the same disastrous consequences. It is long past time to abandon this partisan path and for appropriators to work together to get the job done. Appropriators know how to do this. And in fact, we already have a path signed into law by the president, endorsed by the speaker, and passed by this body to get there. And from the day the majority reneged on that agreement, we have known that we are headed for a continuing resolution at best and a shutdown at worst. Democrats are ready to work. We were ready in the spring. We were ready last week. We are ready today, tomorrow, and every day to work in good faith with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to do the work of the American people. And I hope the members of the majority will find it within themselves to step forward and to do the same. I thank you for the opportunity to be here this afternoon.
Thank you for your testimony. Again, I want to welcome all three of my colleagues here, all of whom I hold in exceptionally high regard. And I agree with you all that we certainly need to make sure the government does shut down, or does not shut down. And I think we have time to get that task done. I consider this a worthy effort in that and a good place to start. With that, I have no questions for the panel, so I'll go to my good friend, Dr. Burgess, the Vice Chair of the committee, for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm still in the process of doing my own evaluation of what's in front of us, but let me just ask, the President has shocked and worried many of us many times over the last 2.5 years. One of the more shocking things that he said recently was in response to the high number of undocumented immigrants that were showing up in New York and Boston, and to placate the mayors of and governors of those political entities, he said he might institute a remain in Texas policy. Oh my God, how absolutely frightening. And clearly it's in response to, yes, our governor has been helping people, actually doing what the federal government was doing and putting people on planes and buses and getting them to the destination where they wanted to go. The the mayor of New York City complained that, I don't remember, he said he had 6,000 people. Oh my gosh. In Texas, we call that Tuesday morning. In the 2.5 years of this administration, well over 2 million people have entered the country illegally. Most of those have arrived in Texas, some in New Mexico, some in Arizona, fewer in California. But where they go from there is anyone's guess. Now, I tried to get the Secretary of Health and Human Services, when he came before our budget committee with his views and estimates on the budget, I asked him what he was prepared to do to help smaller communities, smaller municipalities, smaller school districts, smaller healthcare facilities in the state of Texas. What is he doing? What is he proposing to do to help them with what they will soon be facing? And he basically had no answer for that. He said there are intergovernmental arrangements that will take place. Well, I'm waiting, and I haven't seen them happen yet. And now that we have mayors and governors in other cities complaining about what Texas has been enduring month in and month out, literally every month of this administration, now it becomes a problem. So I'm concerned when I hear that there may be a prohibition on moving people out of one place to another. Is there something you can help me with to help me better understand that we will not be just requiring Texas to maintain control of those individuals just indefinitely?
Thank you for the question. And yes, I think we recognize that this is sort of a difficult conversation. The reality is that the administration should be actually instituting the Remain in Mexico plan. We are trying to, I think, look at how do we keep control of these individuals that are crossing into the United States illegally, and busing them or transporting them across the country actually causes some significant issues. And let me offer this up. According to the New York Times, the administration has lost over 85,000 children that they, under law, have a responsibility to care for. Now, whether they have transported them to some other state, we don't know. These are the questions that I think everyone is asking. The influx has certainly put dire straits on all of our social services, including in cities like New York, Arizona, and most certainly Texas. And this crisis is costing our states $12 billion in New York this year alone. The ICE office is fully booked through October of 32. We have to try to find a way to stop this influx. And this is certainly one very small, minor way to sort of put a stopgap in place. And I want to, maybe just circle back around to a comment that that Ms. DeLaura made initially about FEMA. FEMA funding is actually taken care of in here. If you look at the language that was put forward, we are allowing flexibility for FEMA to be able to spend up to their entire year's appropriation so that there is no question of taking care of services in these affected communities that currently have natural disasters. So with that, I yield.
Well, thank you for that answer. Mr. Joyce, Chairman Joyce, when you made the comment in your remarks, when you fail to enforce, more will come. And actually, I think very much that is true, but the opposite is also true. When you do enforce, you will reduce that pressure that is now existing on our southern border. And we know this because it's worked before. When the unprecedented influx of Honduran immigrants occurred in 2014, ironically, 2 years after President Obama unilaterally instituted DACA, which sent the message down south that if you get here, you're going to be able to get in free. We'll give you a permiso and you'll be able to stay in the country indefinitely. What changed that equation was they began to send Hondurans back and Guatemalans back and Salvadorans back. And when they did that, the numbers plummeted. Now, they didn't keep it up, unfortunately. And I do recall there was some concern. You have a plane load of children who've arrived here without permission and you send them back. It does raise some questions of what's going to happen to them. And that's in 2014. That's President Obama. When President Trump put the Remain in Mexico policy, when it actually was up and running and working, it really did dramatically reduce the numbers. So we know what works. Now, unfortunately, this administration, and I mean, I don't know why they do some of the things they've done. It's almost like they deliberately are determined to hurt the country. But look, I was down at Fort Bliss in El Paso, talking to Customs Border Patrol there, and they talked about the Remain in Mexico policy and how it had helped. But then shortly after the Biden administration came on board and they said they weren't going to do it anymore, and the courts told them they still had to, still the numbers were minuscule compared to what they had been 15, 18 months previously. That is when the Trump administration had instituted that policy. So in other words, they really had no interest in enforcing what the courts told them they had to continue doing until Congress changed the law. So forgive me for being so discouraged about what the administration has done. I hope and pray that you will be able to get the attention of the administration and make them understand that this is their problem and they have to fix it. The Vice President of the United States, perhaps in response to some of the criticisms that had come from here, said, loudly and clearly, I'm talking to you in Central America, don't come. But then every action they take opens the door wider and they encourage more people to come. And then what do we see from this weekend? Bill Malusian, a Fox News reporter, with the film clips of that train coming in from somewhere in central Mexico, bringing people in. That's the sort of thing that gets translated back downstream. The cartels take advantage of that. And it's so damaging to the people who take that risk to come here. I understand why they do it, but coming through the Darien Gap, oh my God. It's a human tragedy what is going on there, and this administration continues to fan the flames of it and to tell people to continue to come here, and we're not going to do a damn thing. So I hope you're successful with this. I do have some concerns about some of it, but we'll get you a rule, we'll get it on the floor, and we'll see what happens. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Dr. Burgess, I appreciate wholeheartedly what you're saying. And that's why I've been fighting to make sure that our full Homeland Appropriation Bill makes it here someday soon, and we can get those things in there, because there's no way you can say what this administration is doing is Christian, charitable, or in the best interest of those people they're encouraging to come here. We need to stand, what you talk about in 14, I remember with the meeting with the presidents of those countries at that time who said, we don't want to lose these people. These are our good citizens. We want to keep those people at home. Would President tell them not to come? And President Obama, to his credit, started sending people back home there, which helped stem the flow and earned him the title of deporter-in-chief at times. And certainly the next administration did the same thing, put up the red light that it's going to happen. So with all the policies and procedures that we're going to put in place, going in with our funding bill, it still won't stem the tide unless this administration works to do those things. And why we're trying to do those things, it costs, we want to detain more people, we have to have more beds. We'll fund more beds. We want to make sure that those people who are here awaiting their disposition of their case are on means of alternative to detention. In other words, whether it's a phone or ankle brace or something, where they're communicated with and make sure that we know exactly where they're at. The transportation policy that we have in here will not allow people to be airdropped, if you will, into these communities without at least giving notice to these communities in the first place that they're sending these folks there. Because it's wrong what we're doing. It's not compassionate, it's not Christian, and we need to change the way we're doing this. And the only way we can do this is when we pass the whole Homeland Security bill, appropriations bill. But I understand there's some pieces and parts here that'll go in this one, because this is just buying us the 30 days so we can get on with the discussion to try to cure the problems that you've rightfully have brought up here. And I feel for you, for all Texans, for the problems that have existed.
Thanks, Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman from Massachusetts, distinguished ranking members, recognize for other questions he
Well,
cares
thank
to
you, Mr.
pose.
Chairman. And I want to agree with one thing Dr. Burgess said at the beginning of his remarks, and that is he's trying to still figure out what is in all of this, this bill that has been brought before us, which, I mean, we literally just received. The paper is still hot. It's hot off the press. Speaker McCarthy was just asked, why are members on the Republican side so, concerned or reservations about this? And he said, and he was asked, have they read it? And he goes on to say, sometimes they haven't read all the way through. Let's let them understand what it is and see where they are. So the bottom line is, I don't think anybody, I mean, there are major cuts across the board here, and I don't think anybody truly understands the impact of what these cuts will mean. But I do want to, on Meet the Press Daily, our colleague, Congressman Womack from Arkansas, was just on, and he was asked, the host asked, Congressman, we just went over some of the things in this deal that were put together to attract conservative support, the border elements of it, but it does look like it may be DOA less than 24 hours after it was announced. Some of your colleagues, Matt Gaetz, no, Matt Rosendale, called it a continuation of Nancy Pelosi's budget and Joe Biden's policy. Marjorie Taylor Greene says it's a no. What do you make of this mess right now? And Congressman Womack's response was, well, it's an unmitigated disaster right now on the majority side. Look, I'm fearful of what this leads to. And he went on to say that he didn't even think the majority has the votes to pass this rule. Do you agree with our colleague, Mr. Womack, that this is an unmitigated disaster?
Certainly, Congressman Womack is entitled to his opinion. There's 434 other opinions or 432 other opinions, I'm sure, in this building as to what this bill is. But what I see this is a way to get to where we need to go, and that is to pass all 12 appropriation
Yeah, well,
bills
that's not what we're
in the
doing
next
here.
30 days.
I mean, yeah, and I guess I disagree with, with one thing, the way Congressman Womack characterized it. I don't think it's just an unmitigated disaster on the Republican side. I think it's an unmitigated disaster for our country if we were to shut the government down.
May I?
Yeah.
I think what's an unmitigated disaster is what's happening at our southern border.
Well, you're not
And we're
in- yeah,
continuing
yeah,
to ignore the real issue, which is why we're trying to put some policies in
And your
place to
response
address
is you
it.
cut
so.
border security money, which I can't quite get my head around. But in any event, Mr. Joyce, did you write this bill? Is this, I mean, because I'm looking at some of the things in this bill. Have you put this bill together,
No, sir.
all right? Because, I mean, you know, I hear my colleagues say that we have to be fiscally responsible, you know, that, that's why these 8% across the board cuts are justified. But here's what I don't get. When you cut, like, things like medical research on cancer, on Alzheimer's, and on heart disease, I mean, yeah, I guess in the short term, you can claim a savings, I suppose, because you're cutting something. But what you're doing is you're slowing progress on research that will find a cure. If we could find a cure to Alzheimer's disease, wouldn't we all agree that not only would it be this tremendous benefit for the whole world, all of humankind, but we would save countless dollars in healthcare costs right now that we need to expend to be able to pay for people with Alzheimer's. Or, if we could find more cures and more treatments for cancer to keep people out of hospitals, why don't we look at that as an investment that brings us savings? Or Head Start. I mean, 8% Head Start gets cut. I mean, the whole point of Head Start is to give young kids an opportunity to succeed. I mean, without programs like that, lots of kids would fall through the cracks. And yeah, that's a tragedy for those individuals, but if all you care about is, the bottom line, you're going to end up paying more in other programs to be able to deal with that. I mean, I don't get it. I mean, cuts in law enforcement, FBI, DEA, other federal law enforcement officers, fighting terrorism, fentanyl trafficking, border security funding, as Ranking Member DeLauro has pointed out, is cut. FAA, including air traffic controllers, Army Corps of Engineers, construction activities, WIC gets cut. I thought we had a bipartisan consensus that WIC, is a good thing, that helps a lot of, pregnant mothers deliver healthy babies and, young children be able to get a start. LIHEAP, cut by 65%. Mr. Laura, am I right? LIHEAP gets cut by 65%?
Yes.
Does anybody disagree that these are cuts in these programs, or?
May I?
Yeah, you may, absolutely.
So we're talking about 31 days at an 8% cut, which annually is 1%. If you look at the numbers, they compare to the 2019 funding levels, which I would add was the budget
You're
that.
playing games with numbers.
No,
and the
I'm not.
idea
I'm
that-
actually
and the-
trying to
and
explain.
So wait a minute. So what you're saying here is that you would only favor a cut for 1 month in these programs, and that
What
you
I'm
would not
saying is this
support a
particular bill is looking at a
please,
31-day continuing resolution, so we
Please.
can negotiate some of
Yeah,
these
please,
issues.
well,
Let me just remind everyone that if we talk over each other, our
I mean,
stenographer can't keep up.
this is
So
maddening.
gentlemen will suspend. We do have to be careful not to talk over each other, otherwise a correct record of this proceeding will not occur. The gentleman from Massachusetts controls the time.
I mean, these cuts are intentional. And I don't know about, maybe, I don't know what, I mean, I listen to all kinds of news stations, and I'm hearing the comments from your Republican colleagues who are reluctant to support some of these appropriations bills because, quite frankly, they don't have trust, you know, that you will follow through. So are you and now I guess I get it. I don't understand. Are we just doing a cut for symbolism, or, you know, to make a point, to try to get people to get on for to vote for a bill for a month, and then what happens a month later? Do people no longer want the cuts? I mean, I don't even, you know, I mean, cuts in wildfire suppression, Bureau of Indian Affairs, rural housing service and rural utility services. I mean, you know, I mean, the gentleman from Texas was going on about the high cost of energy, and yet LIHEAP, if these numbers were to hold, would be cut by 65%. Every single person on this panel, no matter what state you come from, have hundreds of thousands of constituents in your state that benefit from LIHEAP. You know, you start cutting that program, you know, there are going to be people who will not be able to heat their homes or cool their homes in some cases. I don't, and again, I guess I agree with Dr. Burgess. We're still trying to understand all of this and to do an analysis of what these cuts would mean if they were to stay in place. But we just received them, Ms. DeLauro.
I thank you. Let me just correct the record in several items here. First of all, with regard to FEMA, it's the $20 billion that is there. The $16 billion that comes out of the supplemental is not there, which is what has been anticipated in an effort to deal with what happened in Maui and other more recent tragedies. So we're not going to have enough money for FEMA. Let's take a look at border security for a moment, and I want to talk about LIHEAP. Border security, that everybody, as I said, is so very much concerned about. This is an 8.1% cut to border security. That is billions of dollars to be cut. You can't talk out of both sides of your mouth and be concerned about border security and then deal with an 8.1% cut. And Congressman Joyce, who is a dear friend, we serve on the committee together, as does Ms. Bice, that border policy is not Christian. Over 11,000 Christians have signed a petition decrying the immorality of the House Republican cuts. And the cuts are repeated in the bill before us here today. Let me talk about the LIHEAP program, which, as I said, in the past, for those who have been here for a number of years and understand that LIHEAP has always been a bipartisan effort because it's cold in New England, it's cold in the Midwest, it's cold, and it's hot in some places. So LIHEAP, it's understandable that people want to make sure that folks have the opportunity to be able to survive. So this bill funds LIHEAP at an annual level of only $1.4 billion. Problem. It was a $4 billion program last year. We passed a bill last year for $4 billion. LIHEAP allocates 90% of its funding at the beginning of the fiscal year, I might add, and October is a critical month for the LIHEAP program. Last year, LIHEAP set its allocations to each state and for the tribes on October 20th, as states need the funding of the beginning of the fiscal year to be able to prepare for the winter. By the way, the 90% allocation for last year totaled $3.4 billion. And even if LIHEAP could allocate 100% of the amounts provided in this bill, that would only be $1.4 billion. It's a 65% cut. It's not 8.1% cut because you've disregarded what happened in the bill and in the budget that we are currently in this year, which has provided that money. You just eliminate $2.5 billion, you leave the balance, and then you cut it by 8.1%. Think about it. As Congressman McGovern said, read it closely. It is it is disastrous. And I don't believe anybody wants to see disastrous. But that's what this is all about. And this notion, I just have to, that this is either a 1% cut or 31 days. Congressman McGovern pointed this out. What happens at the end of 30 days? We are not going to have 12 individual appropriations bills at the end of 30 days. It takes a good 6 weeks to put these bills together. So that means that we are going to continue these cuts into a next 30-day a continuing resolution, and on and on and on, until we can get to a point where we are sitting and talking about what we did last December when we came together, Democrats and Republicans, to put together a bill that crossed the finish line on being able to fund the government. And I would just say on that issue that House Republicans decided not to participate in that process a year ago in December, but Senator Shelby, Senator Leahy, and myself hammered out a bill. We compromised. Everybody did not get what they want, but we got the bill done, and it was a good bill. Again, one other point, a 1% cut is misleading. There is not a single program, not a single program that is cut by 1% under this bill. They are cut by so much more. And if you take a look at the bill, page 6, line 11, it reads, reduced by 8.1285%. That is an 8% cut to every domestic program outside of the Department of Veteran Affairs. It is really, it's almost ludicrous to think,
that
and on the
includes the
issue
border.
that you talk about is border security, that you cut border security by 8.1%.
And, let me just say, I genuinely mean this, I think, Mr. Joyce, if you and Mr. Lauro got in a room, you could work out a bill that would probably get 300 votes.
I think it's fair to say that all appropriators working in
Yeah,
together.
well, I'm just, and Ms. Bice, she said the magic word, she said, to negotiate. To negotiate with who? I mean, Democrats haven't been asked to be part of any negotiation. Senate Democrats haven't been asked to be part of any negotiation. Senate Republicans haven't been asked to be part of any negotiation. The right wing is negotiating with the far right wing, and guess what? It isn't working. Newsflash, this just came on Representative Good announces he is a no. So now I think the count is up to around 17 no's and some undecideds as of now on this. And so, I mean, are we going to, the Rules Committee is becoming a place now where we bring these things, we report out a rule and we schedule a time to go to the floor, and then they pull it at the last minute. And I don't know if that's going to happen here, but as of right now, and maybe because people haven't had time on your side to read all the stuff in the bill, but a lot of the Republicans that I know, I mean, they are strong supporters of medical research and Head Start, and they believe in, WIC, and they support LIHEAP because their constituents benefit from it. They support the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and I mean, that's not where you want to make cuts, these arbitrary kind of across-the-board cuts, they're mindless. I mean, you do hearings on all these programs, and you decide where you think there can be savings and where there needs to be increases or where things can level off. You evaluate each thing line by line to go in and these, everybody's going to take this cut, with the exception of, the Pentagon and Veterans Affairs. I mean, it is so. I know my Republican friend, I know many of my Republican friends know we can do much, much better. And I find the cuts in this to be offensive. I really do. And I find them to be counterproductive, and if they were to succeed, and if they were to be instituted for the long term, which I would believe they would if this is the way we're operating now, constantly going to the right, to the right, to the right, you know, it would mean a slowdown of progress in medical research, and it would mean more and more expenses in our healthcare system. And we would not save money. We would be actually, you know, we would actually be continuing to accumulate these huge bills. But I'll just close by saying we're getting to the point now. I mean, we were all home over the weekend, and I got to tell you, you guys aren't running this place right, and people know it, people see it, and you know, and by the way, not just Democrats, I mean Republicans. Like, why can't you get together and keep the government running? Why is keeping the government running such a huge deal? Why people just don't get it? We can negotiate things, by the way, in ways that I won't like everything in the bill, and you won't like everything in the bill. But that's the way we've always done it. And at the end of the day, you can get a bill that passes overwhelmingly, or we can continue this madness, which is taking us nowhere. I mean, this is going nowhere. We all know that. I'm not even sure we're going to get a vote on this. But in any event, I appreciate everybody being here. I mean, no disrespect to anybody, but I've had it. And I think a lot of my constituents have had it, the American people have had it. They just want us to get the job done. I yield back.
Chair, thanks, the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Minnesota.
Thank you very much. That was an incredibly dramatic reading of all of the cuts that are 30 days. Mrs. Bice was pointing that out. This is 30 days. Last week, we sat here, we listened to the ranking member talk about the shutdown, the shutdown, the shutdown. We've come forward with a CR, which I think is reasonable. We will then have our 30 days to work on our appropriations bills, look at the programs that you're talking about, do our job, work on that. The Democrats use CRs all the time. I remember when I was first here, we were passing CRs. So this is not.
The gentleman yield? I'm not objecting.
I will chair.
I'm not objecting to the use of a CR. And maybe the gentlelady could just give us some certainty here that, in fact, this bill will come to the floor and pass. I mean, her party's
Ranking
in
member,
charge.
you know what? We are working right now on what is happening right now in rules, and we will do our job here, and then we will see what happens with the floor. And I did want to point out, I have read the bill. I've read the bill several times. I've made notes. And obviously, you have read it because you have other things that you're talking about. And so to say that you just got it, I think is, the ranking member has had the opportunity to read it because she's been talking about what's in the bill.
Well, but we received the bill, the staff received the bill, it was posted yesterday, and that's it, and so forth. And we worked very, very hard to read through it in order to be cogent and factual about what is in the bill.
Well, then we should remember that this is 30-day CR.
Well,
30-day CR. And all of the drama surrounding the cuts, I mean, both of you read many of them that obviously are of concern to people, but we need to remember what we're trying to do is get us to a point where we can work on those 12 appropriations bills, we can have those discussions, we can do that, and I appreciate the fact that there is border security, that HR, is it one or two? HR 2, most of HR 2 is in here because, you know what, we're not talking about the people in my district dying of fentanyl overdoses and the fentanyl that's coming across the border. You know, we didn't really hear about all of the issues that Texas was having until New York threw up its hands and they're saying, oh my gosh. But Texas has been facing that for how long? You know, they've been dealing with the illegal immigrants coming across the border. So this is, I think, a reasonable solution to what we are dealing with. We will have our 30 days. We'll be able to look at those appropriations bills. We're addressing the border, and all of the cuts that you're talking about, they're reductions, and they're 30 days. 30 days. And I did want to give Mrs. Bice the opportunity to kind of complete your thoughts. You were talking about the 30-day and the 1%, and I wanted you to complete that thought.
Thank you. I would just maybe follow up with, it's a 31-day.
31. I'm sorry,
And a
31.
1 month.
I stand corrected.
A 1 month CR, with the idea that, yes, we do want to work on trying to put together those appropriations bills, many of which have already passed out of our committee and are, poised to make the floor to be passed through. I would also just say, we keep talking about the draconian cuts, or we've heard about these cuts. Many of these agencies, this is the same funding they had in 2019 or very similar to it. These are not draconian cuts. And I think the American people have had enough in that we have seen or will see $2 trillion added to our national debt. The American taxpayers can't continue down this path. We have to be thoughtful and reasonable. Yes, funding for NIH and LifeHeap is something that we need to address. But I would also maybe counter that with, if our energy prices weren't so high because of the assault on this country's domestic energy production, we wouldn't see $5 a gallon gas. We wouldn't see high energy costs across the board, and maybe they wouldn't need to invest as much money in these LifeHeap programs as they're currently doing. So thank you for the opportunity to respond. I recognize that this is certainly not perfect, but we are trying to move forward with 3 major points. 1, securing the border, which this administration has failed to do. 2, protect our vets and our military by making sure that they are fully funded. And 3, stopping the unbelievable spend that we have seen over the last 2.5 years under this administration. I yield.
And I would agree with Mrs. Bice. We have to stop the out-of-control spending. We have to. And this will give us the opportunity to go into those committees and take a look at where we can do that, because we can't afford it. And the American people don't want us to continue the out-of-control spending and the debts.
Would the gentleman yield? Would the gentlelady yield? I will
yield.
say that 31 days. I've sat and Congressman Joyce has sat on the Appropriations Committee for a number of years. Please understand that to negotiate 12 bills, first of all, you got to get to a place to negotiate. You're looking at least 6 weeks in order to be able to put the bills together. I did this in December. Last December, as I said, with the help of Democrats and Republicans in the Senate. And we did a continuing resolution, and then it took us through to sometime in December in order for us to come to agreement. So this is not 30 days. This will be more than 30 days. And no one is going to tell me that you're going to then say, okay, so we are not going to cut border security by 8.1% for this next 30 days. But you cut border security right now. And it's an issue that you care deeply about. You can't walk away from that. And it is not, in fact, a 1% cut. There is no program that takes a 1% cut. The bill itself, in the language of the bill, page 6, line 11,
I've got it right here, ma'am.
that it is 8.1% in a cut. So that
For 30 days.
no, but it's not. You're not going to get, at the end of 30 days, you're not going to have 12 bills. You know it, and I know it.
Ma'am, but Mrs. Bice just said that there are several that have already come out of the committee, so I'd like to yield to Mrs. Bice.
Thank you. In regards to the DHS discussion, I think a reminder that the bill also includes appropriation limitation amendments for DHS that block Secretary Mayorkas from spending funding on wasteful and open border policies. The inclusion of H.R. 2 in the package will ensure that the funds are being spent exactly where they need to be, on core border security operations, not on resettlement operations that actually lack legal status. Let's invest in border security, not these superfluous other areas that are currently being funded by the administration.
How do you cope with 8.1% cut to border security now? That's what you're doing. Right
just-
this
Mrs.
minute.
Bice? I yield to Mrs.
just laid
Bice.
it out here.
No, you didn't.
It includes appropriations limitations that block Mayorkas from spending funding on things that we consider to be open border policies and wasteful spending. It's difficult to argue that you wouldn't be able to find those savings for 1 month. And I recognize that you have been on appropriations much longer than I have, and you understand that this process is not a quick one. But this is a starting point. This is a discussion point for us to move forward. And right now, we lack a secure border. If you poll
have no
Americans right
consensus
now,
around this bill.
if you poll Americans right
You
now,
don't know that.
Yes, you do. You have 17 Republicans who have said no.
Well,
I
and Mr. Chair,
believe the time was
reclaim my time. But you know what? It's not to the floor yet. We don't know. I'm sure that there are people having discussions. They're always having discussions. So whatever, if you believe everything you read in the press, then you can believe everything you read in the press. I mean, I guess Mr. Joyce, I yield to Mr. Joyce.
Well, just for the purpose of discussion here, 10 of the 12 appropriation bills have made it through full committee.
Oh, thank you.
Waiting action on the floor.
Two have not gotten to full committee at all, Labor,
So,
HHS, and Commerce Justice
I
Finance.
guess, we can go through and you can create all the drama you want, saying we're cutting Head Start, we're doing all of this, we're doing all of that. But last week, it was all about stopping a government shutdown. We've come forward with a bill. No, and I think Mrs. Bice said maybe not perfect, but we have come forward with this bill to make sure that we don't have government shutdown, and we are able to do the work we need to do.
But this has not
So-
been a negotiated bill.
Okay,
Once
it's
again,
not,
I'm going to ask us not to talk over each other.
I'm not
because
talking over, I'm
Well,
just
well,
clarifying.
I have the floor.
The gentlelady from Minnesota controls the time.
And I do think that we need to make sure that we are going forward. And Mrs. Bice and Mr. Joyce laid out a reasonable solution to what we need to do to keep going and to finish our work with the 12 appropriations bills. And as you pointed out, 10 of them are already out of committee. And so we will continue forward. But I don't think that it's fair for us to be having to listen to the issues regarding government shutdown when we're putting together a bill right now that would prevent that. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll yield back because I believe we have votes.
I would just say to the gentlelady that none of the bills, except for one of the appropriations bills, has passed the floor of the House.
I didn't say
Agriculture
that.
did not
I
make it.
didn't say that. Neither of
Defense
those
did not
folks did
make
not
it.
say that.
So while they have not
Neither of them
passed
said
the
it.
floor.
I would ask that you not talk over one another, please. No, I understand, so, but I expect a long and spirited debate. I just want to make it as easy on the stenographer as I possibly can, so I would ask that. With that, the gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for whatever question she cares to pose.
And I would first yield a minute to Mr. McGovern.
And I'll be very brief. I mean, can we have an honest conversation about what the reality is that we're dealing with here? I mean, yes, I mean, you have passed appropriation bills out of the full committee. Most of them I don't like, but you have passed them nonetheless. Your party is in charge. And so far, only one of them has gone to the floor. We've tried with a couple of others, but they've had to be pulled, not because it's not Democrats' fault, it's because members of your own party don't think the cuts are deep enough. And so the notion that somehow, don't worry, be happy, we're making these cuts, it's only 1 month, ignores what we have been through these last several months. I mean, let's be honest, the Speaker, is essentially being blackmailed by a small group in this chamber who are basically insisting on, what is not only unreasonable, but is unachievable, because the majority of people in this House don't agree with these kinds of cuts. And not just here, but the Republicans in the Senate. And you got to get bills that are signed by the president. So when you talk about negotiations, again, who are we negotiating with? You're negotiating with the extreme elements of your party that don't represent, I don't even think, a majority of Republicans in this country. But, they seem to have the power right now, and we are inching toward a shutdown. And if these numbers are true, that there are 17 members right now who are saying no on this, this is not buying us a month. We'll be back in Rules Committee at the end of this week with something even more extreme. And if that doesn't work, then next week we'll be back with something even more extreme. So at some point, this madness has to stop, and we have to get serious about figuring out a way to get a majority votes. And you know, I would hope it would include Democrats, but if not, you got to figure out within your own party to get something done, so that the Senate can react and actually send us something over more reasonable, and we can pass that and then move on. But again, I don't mean to take it out on you, and I appreciate you both being here, all three of you being here. But it's like, I mean, we're not even being honest with ourselves here about what's going on. Never mind with the American people. And I just think this is if ever there's a moment for candor, it is now. And I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. I do hear the concerns. I think we all have concerns about our nation's fiscal health, but I think it is irresponsible to focus solely on cuts to domestic spending when our House Republican colleagues are unwilling to make wealthy corporations and billionaires pay their fair share. When we all know the biggest driver of our national debt in recent years has been the tax cuts that came through in 2017, and there are now movements to extend them into the future. Representative DeLauro, you talked a little bit about the damage that even 31 days would do to FEMA funding, disaster relief funding. I find it kind of incredible that there's no disaster relief attached to this CR, and certainly the first responders in my area are very concerned about FEMA funding moving forward. But the concern I wanted to raise, we've seen report after report in recent days about rising childhood poverty and the impact of cuts to SNAP and WIC and Head Start. These are all things that have been proven over time to reduce costs to our country, giving kids a good start. And to hear that there would be even further cuts, when every time I go home, I'm hearing from our food banks and from our churches and from our schools about rising hunger, particularly for kids. Can you speak to what this budget would do, or this CR would do, even for 31 days?
Yeah, well, we're looking at, it's about $462 million less for the WIC program. You know, we're talking about, you know, hundreds of thousands of people who will be jettisoned from that program. You've got almost $124 million less for food safety, for food prices, jobs in rural areas, and the outcomes. It's unbelievable that what we would do is to go down a road with nutrition assistance, which is cut severely here. And I don't know how that really is a part of looking at about saving money. You know, there are places that you can save money. You talked about, people like to talk about the deficit as to the spending side of it, but folks don't want to talk about the revenue side, and which we're short of revenue, which has to do with looking at the kind of tax breaks, opportunities that we provide to the richest corporations, many of whom pay no tax at all in this country, let alone a fair share. They just don't pay tax. So that the havoc that we would place, you're taking a look at cutting back on vouchers for fruits and vegetables. You're looking at, serious cuts to nutrition programs, which just don't make any sense at all in terms of the health and the well-being of the country. And you know, it is. We know how to negotiate appropriations bills. We know that you have to make cuts in some place. But we have been able to come together. You have cuts here to the National Institutes of Health. And the chairman and I have worked over the years to provide $11 billion for the NIH, for life-saving biomedical research. This is not wasteful spending. We have come together on education programs and understanding the value of public education in this country. Do we have differences of opinion? Absolutely. And what the dollar amounts are. But we know that we have to address these issues. And the severity of the cuts, which would affect, and part of what's affected in the agriculture sector, besides nutrition and besides food safety, are what's happening to farmers. Guaranteed loans. It's $536 million less for direct and guaranteed farm ownership loans. They protect rural corporate broadband, and so necessary in my state, but more so in rural parts of this country, are severely cut back, and it is at a minimum of 8.1%. In some areas, it's a lot more.
Okay. You know, I know we've got to get down to votes, so, you know, I do find it very, very troubling, certainly based on the record thus far of the speaker being able to get appropriations and other bills to the floor. I don't think I'm willing to risk a hungry kid's stomach for 31 days based on what we're seeing here. I do think it's encouraging that the Senate appropriators were able to come together and use the agreed-upon spending limits. And I find it really disappointing that the House has been unable to.
Well, that's the point, if I just may add. There was a fulsome, robust negotiation with regard to debt limit and to appropriations and to spending. In full disclosure, people may know here, I voted against the budget agreement. Not because I would never have voted for the nation to default, because you just don't do that or hold it hostage. But however, I was very concerned about what was happening to appropriations bills. And that's what, and as a ranking member of the full Appropriations Committee, to be advocating for these efforts, it just didn't seem that I could do that. But House passed it, Senate passed it, President signed it into law. It is the law of the land. Let's do what the Senate is doing. And I understand also, it was Congressman McHenry, who was part of those budget agreement negotiations, who said, you got people who want to go above the caps, below the caps. Let's adhere to the budget agreement. I'm there. I'm willing to fight it out there. And I voted against this agreement. That's where we need to go.
So am I correct that there was a vote and you lost on the vote, but you were willing to abide by the results?
Yes, because
Okay.
it's the law
With
of
that,
the land.
I would yield back.
Thank you. Do we should go to vote?
Quickly, we're going to excuse and let everybody go, so we'll recess. At the beginning of the last vote, please cast your vote and come back. Members of the panel need to come back, and we'll resume at that point. Again, thank everybody for their cooperation. We'll see you shortly.
Thank you.
Resolution 684 and H.R. 5525. With that, I believe Mr. Reschenthaler is next up in terms of any questions you might have for the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank both witnesses for coming in, and I yield back.
Brilliantly done.
I've always liked you.
Next, go to my good friend from Colorado, Mr. Neguse. Gosh, this is wonderful. Mr. Massey, you know, it's kind of up to you now.
I want to thank the witnesses for coming in, and I want to thank all three of them for coming back. And I yield back.
Okay, thank you very much. My good friends from New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll give a few moments to let the witnesses and myself catch the breath. Everybody, great. So I love seeing this sort of kidding and relationship that you're just displaying here, because I remember coming in at the same time as Representative Bice as a freshman, and when you were chair, constantly telling us about it's got to be four corners. Like, how many times do we hear, it's got to be four corners? And so I looked back up, and it looks to me like the last time we passed an appropriations bill, it was 361 in the House to 69. that number tells us that it was an incredibly bipartisan four-corner bill. In the Senate, it was 68 to 31. And that's, as you pointed out, what appropriators do, but they negotiate all four corners. And it is the one time when our Congress, on both sides, talk to each other and negotiate. So, you know, Representative Bice, did you vote for the Fiscal Responsibility Act?
Yes.
And Representative Joyce, did you also vote for the Responsibility Act?
Is that this year?
You're being told you did.
I'm trying to remember what.
FRA.
This year?
Yes, the one this year. The budget deal, yeah. So I think that was also one of those moments where we had Americans really scared, markets scared, the world scared, that we were not going to be able to actually get the job done and we were going to default. And instead, there was a bill passed with 149 Republicans and 165 Democrats that was not the favorite of maybe anybody, but that's the nature of legislation, it's the art of compromise. And we just heard the ranking member say, I didn't like it, but I am going to work towards that. And I think that's what's so worrisome for my community and for people who talk to me. I pointed out that the car dealers were in my office last week saying, you don't understand that when we don't have appropriations, it hurts my dealership because federal employees or people related who have contracts, and New Mexico has a lot of service members and federal employees and people with contracts, they don't get the work on their cars done, right? And so it's a ripple effect. So I think that this is why it is so scary that we're not doing this, that we're at this moment again, and we have this short-term funding bill that really gives the extreme MAGA Republicans 4 more weeks, and we don't know what the next demands are going to be, because I read it like you encouraged us to, and it is not just 8% cut, it's 8.1285%. It's very precise about how much is being cut, and that's what it says. Everything is cut except for these very small areas. Ranking Member DeLauro, we've talked a lot about energy tonight, and when we start looking, there's both the 8.1285% cuts, but there's also the agricultural appropriations bill even looks at more cuts. Electric co-ops serve people in my community and people in almost every one of the members' communities here. Can you tell us what's going to happen to electric co-ops if we continue down this path?
Well, I mean, that's the point. First of all, with regard to the agriculture side of this, with the cuts, we're looking at guaranteed loans to farmers, which are going to be cut very seriously. It's $536 million less for direct and guaranteed farm ownership loans, let me see if I can put it this way. There's been a lot of talk about how the 8% cuts are only for 31 days. But the cuts in the House Republican funding bills for the full year are even steeper. That is where you will see that the cuts to rural electric co-ops, which will decimate the energy sector there and the cost of energy, which people are so concerned about. And that is in the bill. So that is a much steeper cut. You didn't ask me about education, but if you go to those regular funding bills, which is where they want to go with 31 days is to work out these bills, we're talking about the Title I program in education as an 80% cut in Title I, just about eliminating public education in this country.
80% cut in Title I, and I think we need to remind Americans what Title I means, and that means those schools who who have higher poverty levels. And they're the schools that need it most. And that's why the federal government comes in and provides some assistance. And so we're going to cut it
Yeah,
80%.
They want to cut it 80%, which is the cornerstone of our federal investment in public education. So your point is that if it's 8%, 8.1%, some instances like LIHEAP, 65%, or you look at Army Corps, which is, I think, 18%. You look at the wildfire suppression of funding, it's a cut of about 44%. So there are significant cuts. But if you get to the bills that they talk about wanting to get to, the regular bills, the cuts are staggering in terms of where they want to try to go in these efforts. And so you can't, it's not 8%. It's a heck of a lot more. And in the agriculture bill, they would take the agricultural bill back to 2007 in terms of the numbers. For the labor wage bill, it's to 2008. And it is the same for several of the other appropriations bills. So, and I'll make the point again, it's 31 days, but we cannot craft a final bill in 31 days. You need at least 6 weeks in order to do this. So that means if you have another continuing resolution, you're going to look at the same cuts, which are going to be extended into not 30 days, but 60 days and more, which is really unbelievably harmful to folks.
And I think that that's the concern that my constituents have, and even when I go to places that aren't New Mexico, is that the Fiscal Responsibility Act set out the framework. And the Senate, both Republicans and Democrats, am I correct, that they've been following what we agreed to?
That's right.
Right? And the Senate has passed out appropriation bills consistent with what we agreed to, with what 149 and 165 Democrats agreed to.
Yeah, the Senate, both Democrats and Republicans, are adhering to the budget agreement, and which is what we should do. But I'm going to because I asked for this information. Agriculture cuts in the full year bill: $1 billion cut to rural electric co-ops, a $500 million cut from the Rural Energy for America program. For your purposes, it's $15 million cut from New Mexico alone. $4 billion cut from the at-risk agricultural operations. That is in the full year bill, which is where they want to go in the next tranche here. So 31 days is not the end of this process. 31 days opens the door to the massive, massive cuts in the appropriations bills.
And I have a very large rural district, but so do many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. And what you're pointing out is the number of farm loan borrowers, about 104,000. That's farmers. Those are small farmers that really need this help.
And that's in the CR.
Yeah.
That is in the CR.
Yeah. And I think that's something we need to think about is what are we doing to our economy? What are we doing to our rural economy with these kinds of cuts? I could go on. We were talking about, police and law enforcement, earlier when we were talking about other things. And we need to remember my local police departments. I just met with my sheriffs, all the sheriffs in New Mexico, and the local police, burn, JAG, and COPS programs. Those are going to be cut. Like sort of these small local police forces rely on this extra money they get from the federal government, and those are going to be cut, Ranking Member?
Yes, yeah, no, these are programs, we're looking at making communities less safe, fewer law enforcement officers on the beat apprehending fugitives, or fighting, we're all worried about fentanyl and opioid trafficking. So it is a serious cutback in law enforcement across the board.
Right.
Across the board.
So, when we were talking about as we began the the High Wire Act that we did when there was a threat to default on America, I asked the Republican budget chairman about the drastic cuts to rural communities. I asked him, how do I go back and I explain this to my rural communities? And he told me, open quote, you should tell them that we have to prioritize. And what this tells me is we are not prioritizing the people who need it most. We're not prioritizing rural America when we do these kinds of cuts.
Well,
Ranking
across
member-
the board cuts don't prioritize, it's just a.
It's across the board,
just-
so we don't look at it. Ranking member, can you explain to us, when we do these kinds of cuts and look at cuts only, who are the Republicans protecting? Like, what for? Why can't we do something else?
Well, I said a few moments ago that I think that the view that the spending or public investments in people's lives, their economic future, I think is a proper role for the government. But there doesn't seem to be the same view as to revenue and of how we are getting revenue from the wealthiest corporations, many of whom don't pay any taxes. It's not even a question, as I said, of paying a fair share. They just don't pay taxes at all. And so there is a shortage of revenue. And so that you got tax cheats, you got corporations, et cetera, who wind up getting the special breaks and the tax credits, et cetera. And that's something that should be looked at in a very substantial way. And you will look at the notion, not here, of cutting back on the IRS and hiring of people that will go after, if you will, the tax cheats. But that's not a road some of my Republican colleagues want to go down.
So instead, we're cutting essential programs from law enforcement to our farmers instead of making sure that everybody pays their fair share in taxes, protecting the wealthiest
And as I say,
corporations.
it's not even fair share. We have corporations, over 30 in this nation, who pay no taxes at all.
Yeah.
And another 70 or 80 who don't pay what they're supposed to be paying in taxes. But we failed to go after them and make the case that that would add to the revenue that we need and we have in order to deal with making public investments.
So we could have public investments as long as if we did that.
Will the
I
gentle-
also heard a
will the-
lot of.
Would the gentlelady yield?
I also,
Would this not apply also to the president's family to pay their fair share?
but I
yield
think
back.
that's the.
It's any president's family.
That makes no sense whatsoever
It's
in
any
terms of what we're
president's
talking about.
family.
Yeah, everybody's family should pay their fair share.
Yeah, right.
So we talked a lot about border security. We also had a ranking member DeLauro talk about how we're actually cutting border security. I wanted, Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record 2 articles by the Cato Institute, which I understand is often described as a more conservative institute. The first one is titled, President Trump Reduced Legal Immigration. He did not reduce illegal immigration.
Without objection.
The second article is that fentanyl is smuggled into the United States for U.S. citizens, by U.S. citizens, and not by asylum seekers.
Without
And
objection.
Thank you very much. And I think a lot of what we need to start looking at is increasing what we need to go after fentanyl, because it is destroying our communities. And so we need to invest in those things, including making sure we don't cut law enforcement like this bill does and like their agriculture appropriations bill does. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for any questions he cares to pose.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congresswoman Bice and Congressman Joyce, thank y'all for being here. Y'all negotiated great. We got a great dialogue going. This is a healthy conversation we're having. The issue that my good friends on the other aisle will never admit is this piece of clothing on Congressman Massey. What is it, 30 trillion?
33.
33 trillion. I keep hearing spending from the other side. Spending, you name all these programs that have an 8% cut, they get 92%, but they've got an 8% cut. And granted, they're great programs, but I was on a plane the other day, and I was just thinking, after listening to the dialogue to the friends on my left, you know, you can have airplane carries people of every ilk. They do veterans, take them different things. They have, an airplane is a great thing that serves a lot of people. But if it's out of gas, the whole plane goes down. Y'all are willing to let the plane go down. And I guess just try to keep spending until there's no more. And that's the issue I have. And to bring up, to be honest, to bring up law enforcement cuts, when y'all are the party that wants to do away with law enforcement, when you bring up the border and deny that the border is just open, and you bring up health care, what about the illegals that are coming across the border with no test? You don't know what they're bringing in. And so it's kind of ironic that we're even having this discussion. But that being said, thank y'all. I've got some issues with it. I have no faith in this administration, none. To give him, and Chip has brought up the things on the border, which are great. Do I think in 30 days this man will actually obey the law when he's violated everything in the law, in the Constitution for an invasion? No, I do not. Do I think that it will finally dawn on him that he has to do this? No. I'm a big proponent, and I've told the chairman this, I think the 12 appropriation bills ought to be passed. Now, can we do it by September 30th? Probably not. But that's the right way to have a top line to see if we can make a dent in the debt of this country, because people now are getting it, particularly with the rampant spending, the $2 trillion that we're going in debt now. I'm tired of hearing about the optics of a shutdown. I will tell you this, shutting the complete country down is a reality. It's not an optic. And that's what I see coming down the pipe. Americans are feeling it in their pocketbook. And so I'm going to vote against it in rules in this committee. And we're going to, over the next, 12 days, I hope we'll go to work and come to an agreement. I will tell you, y'all have been great, though, in trying to come up with a solution. We all want the same thing. We do. But we got those on the other side that do not. And that's the seriousness of the situation as we see it now. So thank you for what you're doing.
Would the gentleman yield for 1 second?
Yes, ma'am, and don't filibuster. Mr.
No,
Laurie.
I won't. I always try to deal with facts, though. But I want to say, you were going to vote against this. What would it take for you to vote? What would you be wanting to vote for?
Same thing we've always stated earlier, 12 appropriations passed in regular order, a top line limit of 1.47, instead of the 6-point Pelosi-Schumer debt. And I just, it's insane to even consider that. So that's what I think. Now, can we do it by the September 30th? No. But I'm sorry, we're where we are for a lot of different reasons. And there are a lot of us, including these two sitting here, are very frustrated, as well as all of us are. Because I would have liked to have had this in June or July, at least had the discussion. We were out the whole month of August. And so, but we've got so many things in common that I want to stress that we're trying to solve the problem. We will come up with a solution. And I feel good about coming up with a meeting of the mind.
Do you think we should do something about revenue in terms of?
Not, your definition, in all due respect, is just tax the evil corporations. Corporations don't pay tax. The shareholders do. People do.
Yeah, but do you think that they shouldn't pay any tax? Some of them.
Corporations pay tax. It's those in this administration that I think are coming to light that pay no tax, meaning from China and meaning from this family, Biden family. It's a family of corruption. But that being said, thank you all for what you're doing. I'm looking forward to coming up with a solution.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas, recognized for any questions he has for the panel.
Thank the chairman. Quick question for either Mr. Joyce or Ms. Bice, either one. we've heard some facts thrown around here about adherence to the FRA. And my recollection was that there was a significant amount of conversations going on between both Chair Murray and Ranking Member Collins about tacking on an additional $14 billion, an additional 24 spending, as well as add emergency funding on top of the $23 billion that they were negotiating on the side. And a lot of that's still fluid. But my point is, it's not exactly a 100% adherence over on the Senate side to the exact terms of the FRA. Is that, would you agree, based on my understanding, that that's correct?
Based on your understanding, that is correct. And I would also add that they haven't actually been able to get anything across the finish line either. They've passed these out of committee, but they haven't put anything on the floor as well.
And might I add, in addition to that reality, that what we're talking about here, albeit disagreements on the relative level of spending in this deal for the Department of Defense and veterans versus non-defense, non-veteran spending, recognizing that is different than the FRA structure, that the overall spending level is maybe not to the dollar, but effectively commensurate the same at a top-line level as the FRA deal, for better or worse. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so in trying to keep with the spirit of the FRA deal, even for those who voted for it or those who voted against it, that is what is true about this proposal currently before us, correct?
That is correct.
And is it not also correct that in this proposal before us, we maintain the level of defense spending that was passed in the FRA?
That is correct.
And is it not also correct that we are maintaining the level of veteran spending, whether it's through the FRA, it's the same as basically 2023 plus a couple of billion, but we're keeping that the same, correct?
Correct.
So what we're trying to accomplish in this piece of legislation, and I'm speaking to some of my conservative brothers and sisters in this, I hesitate to use the word august body, that we are then reducing spending for the remainder, the non-defense, non-veteran discretionary spending, by just over 8%. Is that correct, across the board?
That is correct.
Now, in doing so, we are basically, that would be about half of what it would take to get to what many in this conference wanted to achieve, which is getting back to pre-COVID level area spending of 2019. In other words, about 8% would get you about halfway there for, again, the non-defense, non-veterans discretionary spending. Does that sound right to you? That's what I understand from people studying the numbers.
I will take your word for that.
I think that is roughly correct. And so my point of bringing that up is to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who unsurprisingly criticize the 8% reductions and walk through the parade of horribles. But remember that at some point here, we have to get off the merry-go-round. We have to recognize what we're doing to the American people, our economy, and spending with respect to inflation. And we're trying to find a path to any sort of fiscal responsibility or sensibility. And that the response from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle is effectively a generic statement of taxation. And so I would ask the gentlelady, the ranking member, I would ask,
Yes.
Would it be your preference that we have a $2 trillion deficit this year? Do you believe we should increase taxes $2 trillion? In other words, or stated differently, $20 trillion over 10 years.
Yeah, let me just say this. First of all, the premise that this is in keeping what we're talking about with the FRA, this is billions of dollars lower than the FRA.
Say that again, how much?
Billions of dollars lower than what the FRA suggested. And I'll take a look at what this is. So this is lower than the FRA. We're not dealing with apples and apples here. So, but just to say this, there is got to be a balance here somewhere. I have cut spending. I negotiated a budget bill last December with Republicans and Democrats,
Right, but
House and Senate.
But we're talking about being $2 trillion in deficit spending this year. $2 trillion.
Well, let
when
me
we're
ask you-
$33 trillion in debt.
Well, but the fact of the matter is that you have no, and I'm assuming that 2017 tax cuts were something that were embraced. And there was no...
The revenue as a percentage of GDP had never been higher than it was a year ago, other than about the same height
revenue is
in
not-
2000 and in 19...
revenue is not. We are not...
as a percentage of GDP,
Well,
as effectively 2 years ago, revenue had only been at that level twice before in the history of this country, ever.
Well,
That's just true.
There is no desire to deal with a balance between revenue and spending.
But hold on a
With
second.
all of
If we
the-
were at the highest level as a percentage of GDP that we've ever been, give or take,
Well,
a percentage.
I'm not going to take, I'm going to look at the numbers myself. I just don't take what you say by fiat here, is that is the absolute.
Well,
that
as I
is
say,
the-
let me Google that for you. It is in
Well,
fact
thank you.
the case that as a percentage of GDP, again, effectively about a year or two ago.
Well, where were you on the tax cuts in 2017? That was okay to do what we did, which was
But
$2 trillion.
the 2017 tax cuts
$2 trillion.
resulted in
no,
the
it did
2017
not.
cuts.
It didn't.
We ended up having, as of this time,
Right.
Could you have a spirited discussion?
Right.
Just please, one at a time.
the
I hear you.
highest,
Thank
the
you.
highest revenue as a percentage of gross domestic product that we've ever had.
Listen, my friend, that the people who benefited the most were the people who were at the 0.1% of the people in this nation, and the corporations and the special interests. Working Americans and middle-class families did not see the benefit of those tax cuts. And there was no one on your side of the aisle that expressed any view
so again,
that
going back
this
to-
was going to
Ms.
add to the
Laura,
deficit.
So
$2
going
trillion.
back to the
Sorry.
main point here, okay?
$2 trillion.
And in my time here, the point here is we had the highest percentage of revenue as a percentage of gross domestic product. And again, I'm saying give or take. There was two other times in history about the same level. 2000 and I can't remember, 19, I don't know, maybe right after the war sometime. And so we had the highest percentage revenue. So as they say, it's not a revenue problem, it's a spending problem.
It's a revenue.
Now, it's not a revenue problem.
It is.
We have had for a long time an understanding of where we were going to be heading with respect to mandatory spending. For a long time, we've been watching that grow, knowing it's coming. We've done nothing about it. Neither party, by the way, has done nothing about it. So here we sit, and we're trying to constrain spending. We're trying to constrain spending in the discretionary pot, not really yet touching, obviously, mandatory, which neither party has been willing, frankly, to go down that road. My point here is we've got legislation in front of us, and again, speaking to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, as well as to people on the conservative bloc of this conference, that whether you love it or don't love it, it is legislation that would reduce spending. Again, speaking to my conservative colleagues who are out railing about this not doing anything, it would cut spending 8% for non-defense, non-veteran discretionary spending, which is significant, as evidenced by the concerns of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle of what that might mean for certain programs that the gentlelady has outlined and so forth. I believe that it's an important constraint, a constraint on the bureaucracy to be able to pull back and force adherence. So, for example, with DHS, the natural and predictable talking point about saying, oh, well, this is going to cut 8% of DHS, resulting in X billion dollars of cuts. Well, just for the average person listening out there, it is still higher than the 2021 levels that we were spending for DHS. It is only fractionally below that of the 2022 levels. My point being, DHS can figure out, like every other business or human has to do, how to manage its affairs without continual increases in spending. All we're saying is, yes, with DHS and every other agency, you need to figure out how to tighten the belt. The point of adding HR 2, it's not to the response to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. It is not hypocritical or contradictory to say you believe you need to have the policy choices that are supposed to be followed in the law being followed, as HR 2 evidences, and then say you can do that with whatever the total is, $60X billion instead of $60Y billion. I don't know the exact numbers, but a reduction in your budget. It's not saying you can't do that. What we're saying is, and by attaching H.R. 2, we are trying to address the fundamental and complete debacle that is the southern border and what that now means for the rest of our country. I mean, the fact is, in my news feed that I get sent to me regularly from my staff, there is a constant stream every day of the impact of the border on our country in Texas. In just this morning's news feed, I had a story about 2,200 migrants in Eagle Pass and a mass crowd. I had a story about the masses in the Darien Gap. I had a story about the masses on a train in empty cars riding up through Mexico. I had a story about migrants and human smugglers wearing camouflage and jumping across walls and having video of that happening and getting away without being found. We have stories of the hundreds of rounds of ammunition and IED found on Texas soil on this side of the Rio Grande. We have stories of less than 4 days ago, a 10-year-old boy drowning in the Rio Grande while crossing with his mom. We have the story in years past of last year. This is an example of the 53 individuals who died in a tractor trailer in San Antonio. A story this morning, a more recent one, that was an older one, of Texas ranchers who live and work near the border are having their properties destroyed by the increase of illegal migrants trespassing. The stories of the local communities in Texas who are dealing with the impact on their schools, their hospitals, and their local economies. Going down the list of all of the impacts of what we're doing in Texas, the $10 billion, the $10 billion, you want to talk about appropriations? The $10 billion that Texans have appropriated to manage dealing with the border crisis, where the federal government, it's still my time, where the federal government is utterly refusing to do its job. $10 billion that the taxpayers of Texas have borne to manage dealing with it. The Texas Department of Public Safety that have intercepted and found 432 million lethal doses of fentanyl. That's what they've intercepted as DPS after it gets past Border Patrol because of how bad it is in Texas. And my Democrat colleagues scoff at this notion. And this is what is at the centerpiece of what we're trying to accomplish in this legislation. And so just a very direct message to my so-called conservative colleagues who right now apparently are ready to walk away from legislation that would, for 30 days, cut the non-defense, non-veteran spending for the discretionary spending by 8% in attaching H.R. 2, a bill that would massively reform our border and try to force the president to do his job, along with a Department of Defense bill that is funded at the level we embraced before, that would fund our troops and would undo a lot of the damage. I know my colleagues on the other side of the aisle don't agree. A lot of the damage of the social engineering of the Department of Defense. That is something that a number of my colleagues are willing to walk away from. I don't agree. I don't agree. And I applaud my colleagues here for working together to try to get that accomplished. I will stand alongside them and advocate for it. We have to find a path forward that doesn't involve just walking away and saying, nah, can't do that. We have an obligation to do it. And I will fight as hard as I can to get the most conservative and strongest approach we can possibly get. And I will hold the line where I think it's something that I can't vote for. But just sitting here as a Texan and American, if we do not secure the border, we are failing our fundamental responsibility as a republic, as leaders of this republic.
What I don't understand in that context is why would you want to cut, and I'll just say a point, why would you want to cut 8.1% from border security? I understand you listed the particulars, and I get that,
Sure.
which leads me to say, why then would you want to shortchange it? Tough, choices are a thing, but this arbitrary across-the-board cuts are another. And this is what it is arbitrary in that regard.
It's-
So that doesn't seem like a serious bill. We
I'm
ought to
trying
get
to be
down to the
respectful. It's
real
my
work.
time. I didn't ask a question there. I want to, but so we can all move on.
Let us negotiate.
Look, my reason for that, my argument for that would be secure the border, okay? Secure the border. Actually do your job, actually follow the law, and then come talk to me about what you want in terms of any additional dollars. But you're asking me to forego the power of the purse. That is to say that my responsibility to take tax dollars and borrowed dollars and give it to an administration that is fundamentally leaving the people I represent exposed. And not just my people, New Yorkers, Oklahomans, people across this country, Ohioans. You let the 10-year-old boy who died in a school bus on the first day of school a month ago. Like, I have an obligation to pressure and force this administration to do its job. And it is beyond my comprehension that I have colleagues on the other side of the aisle who don't seem to care about those policy choices and what it's doing to the people we represent. And I have colleagues on my side of the aisle who are about to walk away from something that we can possibly do here together to get across and send a message loudly and clearly that we should fund a government that will actually do its job and secure the border. So, you know, with that, I mean, I could talk about the border in a significant amount. The only thing I'll just say is this, is that in H.R. 2, again, speaking to a number of folks on our side of the aisle, the amount of strong policies in the H.R. 2 bill cannot be overstated. And for all the folks out there ready to walk away from it, I would just caution you that you are walking away from the most important issue that we're dealing with right now for the people that we represent, and they want us to stand up and fight for them. So I applaud you all for working with us to try to move the ball forward, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. The gentlelady from Indiana is recognized for any questions she cares to pose to the panel.
Thank you, Chairman Cole, for yielding. Thank you to the panelists for your testimony. Look, no member of Congress wants to be in a position to have to vote on a CR, but what we're considering here this evening is a conservative approach that places the emphasis exactly where it should be on strengthening our border policies and cutting spending to make an attempt to get our fiscal house in order, something all of us should be able to support. We are in this position for many reasons. More time is required, though, to complete our work. It's not ideal, but that's a fact. I certainly want the appropriations process to resume in regular order as soon as possible, but since we find ourselves here, we have a responsibility to address what Chairman Cole accurately described in his opening statement as one of our core functions, funding the government. It's interesting, every time we consider a spending bill, we hear cries of all the things we are killing or harming from the other side of the aisle. Frankly, it does get old. The left will say if we cut spending even by 1%, we're harming children, veterans, seniors, and basically every interest group they can list, the, quote, parade of horribles, as my colleague from Texas has stated. Here we are, though, when every American family is suffering from Biden's inflation. The cost of food and fuel alone has slashed household budgets. Americans are suffering more every day from Biden's disastrous open border policies. And what are the Democrats doing? Spending more and ignoring the porous southern border to the point where they appear to be tone deaf to the cries from constituents in places like New York, who at a press conference recently drowned out several of our colleagues with shouts of, "Close the border." The United States national debt is at $33 trillion and counting. That's nearly $100,000 per citizen and nearly $245,000 per taxpayer. It's not sustainable, and House Republicans seem to be the only ones in this city who care about trying to fix it. This CR isn't even cutting enough to get us back to pre-COVID spending levels, a time during which most economists agree the United States overspent then and spent more, and now they want to spend even more. We heard our colleague saying he finds these cuts offensive. It's been my experience that the left finds any cuts offensive. You know what I find offensive? Spending away the future of our children and grandchildren without any restraint and without any end in sight. CNN reported in early August that U.S. inflation means families are spending $709 more per month than 2 years ago. That's $8,508 a year when the national median income is only around $74,000 annually. Bidenflation and out-of-control government spending is costing American families more than 10% of their income. That is driving more and more families to food banks, and it will continue to absorb us if we don't try to change the spending trajectory of this country. Let's just remind all of us that this is a CR for 31 days to allow us to continue to do our work. I'm truly not sure why the left is suddenly concerned about DHS funding when they're not doing anything to secure the border anyway. Maybe this will be a come to Jesus meeting. Our friends on the other side of the aisle may finally wake up to the fact that we can't keep printing money, that our southern border must be secure, and we must take steps to get our fiscal house in order. Now that I have said all of that, Representative Bice, turning specifically to the border, I know you care as deeply as I do about the responsibility to protect our communities from the unfettered flow of illegal drugs coming across the southern border. I know that our friends on the other side of the aisle have chosen to close their eyes to the practical effects of the unsecured southern border, but whether you live on the border or in southern Indiana, 1,200 miles away, or in New York, the effects are visible. Representative Bice, I'm hoping you can talk more about the border measures included in the CR and why this CR is a prudent legislative vehicle to address this issue, as Representative Roy has already discussed.
Thank you for the question. And let me first start out by saying the previous comments as it relates to DHS cuts, I would remind my colleagues that money really isn't the issue. The problem is the administration's policies that they keep pushing forward, which has resulted in 7 million illegals crossing into this country in the last 2.5 years. As it relates to the bill and the policies that are being put forward, it's actually very simple. It is things like increasing the number of Border Patrol agents, ending catch and release policies, keeping families with children together while being detained at the border, putting an end to NGOs who are being funded by the government from providing transportation, lodging, or money to got-away immigrants. These NGOs are directly responsible for some of the influx of migrants into cities like New York. Look, this is a crisis. It was mentioned earlier, unmitigated disaster. We are dealing with a unprecedented number of individuals coming into this country. And the other side of the aisle wants to ignore that fact. This is a responsible, conservative bill that looks to do a couple of things. Protect and secure the border, ensure that our military and our veterans are funded, and to cut spending due to the $7 trillion of spending that's come forward in the last couple of years. I think this is reasonable. It's thoughtful. We're trying to come to some sort of, solution here for, frankly, an issue that should have been solved already, that keeps getting ignored at every turn. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you for that response. I just want to say, in Indiana, we got through the 2008 recession by implementing temporary 8% cuts. And we fared better than most other states, getting through the recession and coming out in a good position. Representative Bice, Representative Joyce, I really appreciate your work on this issue. Certainly your constituents are lucky to have you representing their interests. Thank you for your testimony. I appreciate you working and your time. And I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman from New York is recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be very brief. There's been a lot already said this evening on the supposed draconian nature of these funding cuts in the continuing resolution. Specifically, hearing from my colleagues on the other side of the dais bemoan funding cuts as harmful to everyday Americans. When I'm in my district, I'm reminded every day about the harm that the Biden administration has done to the American people because of this president's utter refusal to secure our border and uphold our immigration laws. Thousands are dying every year in my state, and in your states too, from fentanyl. Communities in my district have been overwhelmed by the relocation of hundreds, approaching thousands, of illegal migrants in upstate New York by Governor Hochul and New York City Mayor Adams. New York City's ICE office is fully booked through October 2032, to process illegal immigrants, and the crisis is costing the state of New York $12 billion is what they claim right now, something New York taxpayers simply cannot afford. And what's worse is this entire crisis, from the flood of illegal immigration across our southern border to the migrant crisis straining the resources of communities in our district, to 40 grams of fentanyl, 40 grams, capable of killing 40,000 people. seized in Jamestown, New York, in New York's 23rd Congressional District. That was all completely avoidable. So if we're going to talk about the pain that this straightforward 30-day continuing resolution would cause, so let's also talk about the pain that too many Americans, too many communities have experienced because of the Biden administration's refusal to secure our borders and enforce our immigration laws. I appreciate the work that's gone into crafting this CR to avoid a government shutdown, something I think my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would agree we do not want. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else seeking to testify on H.R. 1130, House Resolution 684, or the Continuing Appropriations and Border Security Enhancement Act? Mercifully seeing none, this closes the hearing portion. And the panel is excused with the thanks of the chair, and I'm sure every member up here. You put in a long day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next time you get asked to come before the Rules Committee, think twice.
Okay, the chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Reschenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee grant H.R. 1130, the Unlocking Our Domestic LNG Potential Act of 2023, a structured rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or their respective designees. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Energy and Commerce not put in the bill shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in this bill as amended. The rule further provides in order only those amendments printed in the Rules Committee report. Each amendment may be offered only in order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to an amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the whole. All points of order against the amendments printed in the Rules Committee reported are waived. The rule provides 1 motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.Res. 684, condemning the actions of Governor of New Mexico, Michelle Grisham, for subverting the Second Amendment to the Constitution and depriving the citizens of New Mexico of their rights to bear arms under a closed rule. The rule provides that upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order without intervention of any point of order considered H.Res. 684. The rule provides that the resolution shall be considered as read. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee of the Judiciary or their respective designees. The rule further provides consideration of H.R. 5525, the Continuing Appropriations and Border Security Enhancement Act of 2024, under a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against the provisions in this bill. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations or their respective designees. Finally, the rule provides 1 motion to recommit.
If the gentleman weren't such a good lawyer, he'd be a great auctioneer. No, thank you. Thank you very much. You've now heard the motion. Is there any discussion or amendment to the rule?
Mr. Chairman, I first want to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a statement from Representative Sheila Jackson Lee in support of her amendment to H.R. 1130.
Without objection.
And then I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 7 to H.R. 1130 offered by Representative Custer, which clarifies that the Department of Energy shall not deem the export of liquefied natural gas to the People's Republic of China in the public interest unless the Department of Energy and Federal Energy Regulatory Commission jointly certify that liquefied natural gas exports from the United States to China will not increase U.S. natural gas prices. And, Mr. Chairman, this important amendment says that if we are going to export LNG to the People's Republic of China, we should at least certify that it won't increase prices in the United States. Currently, we have those safeguards in place, but this bill eviscerates the careful balance we currently enjoy. So I ask a yes vote on my motion. We should be able to debate Ms. Custer's amendment and vote on it, and I yield back my time.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion of the amendment? Seeing none, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
The opinion of the chair of the noes have
Ask
it.
for a roll call.
Roll call's been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess.
Burgess votes no.
Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey. No. Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. No. Mr. Roy? No. Mrs. Houchin? No. Mrs. Houchin? No. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. McGovern?
Yes.
Mr. McGovern? Yes. Ms. Scanlon? Yes. Ms. Scanlon? Yes. Mr. Neguse? Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Yes. Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Yes. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No.
Clerk will report the total.
9 nays, 3 yeas.
The ayes have it. The amendment's not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm going to just want to make a brief comment, and I won't offer an amendment on this, but I just want to say, with regard to the continuing resolution here, look, if my Republican friends wrote this without any consultation with any Democrats, I don't think without any consultation with Republicans from the Senate, so this is your bill, you pass it, and if this is what your values represent, so be it. It doesn't represent our values. The cuts in these programs, we find, quite frankly, to be offensive. But I just say this to my friends who say they're fiscal conservatives: across-the-board cuts in everything, with an exemption for the biggest bureaucracy in our government, the Department of Defense. It's hard for me to believe, with the voluminous evidence and article after article written on cost overruns and wasteful defense spending, you can't even find, never mind 8% across the board savings, but 1% or 0.5% or an eighth of or 1/10 of a percent of savings there. We all know that there are savings there, and this is not about supporting our troops or about ensuring the defense of our country. I would argue the defense of our country is better served by a tough but lean and efficient Pentagon and military budget. But in any event, I just point that out because for whatever reason, it's okay to cut WIC, but somehow if you're going to cut waste out of a ridiculous missile program that has cost overruns, well, that we can't touch. But in any event, I yield back my time.
Gentlelady have an amendment?
Yes.
Gentlelady's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make in order amendment number 2 to H.R. 1130, offered by Representative Sorensen, which prohibits the act from taking effect until the Secretary certifies that increased U.S. exports of liquefied natural gas will not increase domestic natural gas prices. Mr. Chairman, at this point in time, when inflation is trending in the right direction, but is still an issue for families across our country, I would hope that we could come together and agree that this bill should not go into effect until we can guarantee that it won't increase our constituents' natural gas prices. Otherwise, all the benefits go solely to the oil companies or the natural gas companies. I'd urge a yes vote on my motion, and I yield back.
Is there any further discussion of the amendment? Hearing none.
Mr. Chairman, I would just also speak in favor of this amendment because we really should be doing everything we can to reduce costs for American families, for American workers. And all this does is say, let's make sure that removing the provision that exports should not hurt the public interest should also make sure that it doesn't rise prices for our American families. And so I support the motion, and with that, you'll...
Well, I will respond. I had not intended to, but just to make a couple of points. My friends were worried about the cost. They would rethink their regulatory policies, their Green New Deal policies. All those things have driven up the cost. The reality is, when we opened up export markets for petroleum, we actually saw prices go down, supply go up. There is something called the marketplace out there, and it works. And as painful as the energy prices increase we have, Americans pay less for energy than anybody else in the world. It's not even close, unless you live in a petro-state. That's it. So this is an enormously efficient industry. It's worked very well. But again, if my friends are concerned about the cost, they need to relook at their regulatory policies, some of the things they've done. The reality is we know most folks on your side of the aisle want to drive these folks out of business. They want to end fossil fuels. So that's not going to bring the price down. In the interim, it'll bring it up. So I know this well-intentioned amendment, but I disagree very strongly with the substance. Any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the questions on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. The opinion of the chair and those have it. Roll call's been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess.
Votes no.
Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Aye. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
Aye.
Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
9 nays, 3 yeas.
The noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. Are there additional amendments?
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make and order amendments number 9 and 11 to H.R. 1130 offered by Representatives DeGette and Houlihan. Amendment number 9 reinstates the public interest test for LNG exports to Russia, Iran, North Korea, China, and any other country subject to sanctions imposed by the United States. Amendment number 11 requires the Commission to deny applications with regards to covered foreign countries, which include China, North Korea, Russia, Iran, and any country under sanctions imposed by the United States. Mr. Chairman, I do believe that we should agree that we do not want to be helping our adversaries, especially if it comes at an increased price for our constituents. I urge a yes vote on my motion, and I yield back.
Is there any further discussion of the amendment? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. Reported vote has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon.
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
Aye.
Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
9 nays, 3 yeas.
The noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. There are further amendments. Hearing no request for further amendments, questions on the motion to report. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Chair, I ask for a roll call.
Roll call has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, aye. Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, aye. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, aye. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, aye. Ms. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, aye. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, aye. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Ms. Scanlon.
No.
Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Neguse. Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
No.
Ms. Ledger Fernandez, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
9 yeas, 3 nays.
The ayes have it. The motion to report's agreed to. Accordingly, Mr. Reschenthal will be managing the rule for the majority.
I will manage it for the minority.
Thank you all. I appreciate everybody here. I know this has been a long day, and these are sometimes contentious issues. And I just continue to be proud of this committee for the manner in which it handles its work, and very proud of the staff, which serves us on both sides of the aisle so well. So without objection, the committee is adjourned.